Well, you also use the expression, would it be better to be your authentic self? Well, if your authentic self kind of sucks, then maybe you don't want to be your authentic self. And, a little bit of self awareness might go a long way there.
Hey, welcome to Unlatched Mind, episode 64. My guest today is Frank McAndrew. We had Frank on, back in March of 2020. So right around pandemic time. So Frank joins us again. So reminder, Frank's an evolutionary psychologist over at Knox College in Illinois. Anyway, I follow Frank's work over on Psychology Today and a few other platforms, and he had written a blog about being likable and some of the perceptions we have when we meet people and how we assume we're being perceived. And, it was a fascinating topic when I read through it. So I reached back out to Frank and said, hey, would you be interested in another episode? So he was gracious enough to give me some of his time. So anyway, we touched on the article, and then we sort of we just let it, the conversation went organically kind of everywhere. We talked about culture and society and, some of our tribal roots and the problems of the new society. And, we used the term evolutionary mismatch, which I've been using a lot lately. But anyway, let's just jump in. I give you Dr. Frank McAndrew. But anyway, maybe just a reminder, a little background on who you are.
Well, I'm a psychology professor at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois. I'm a social psychologist, but also I study things from an evolutionary perspective. So I think about us walking around with caveman brains in the 21st century, and that causes a lot of problems. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah. Well, you'll hear me I don't know, when I say the term evolutionary mismatch, does that,
that works. Yep.
Yeah, because the listeners are probably sick of me hearing me say that, but you said you picture us walking around with our caveman brains. Aren't we the same genome for the most part in a different world?
We are. Yeah. It really hasn't been that long ago in evolutionary time. So the world has changed really fast, and we just haven't had time to catch up.
Yeah, that's been the underpinnings of everything I think about or talk about lately, because I just feel like, and again, folks are probably sick of hearing me saying it, but I think it explains so much when we try to understand what social media is doing to us, or what modern tech is doing to us, or just things that we're not adapted for. And I think you have to sort of at least look at that to try to understand, solutions. And right. So, but I just don't think it gets enough credit, frankly. I don't know. And I don't know. But anyway, so, your blog, how to get other people to like you. So I found that interesting. And as I was kind of going through your work, and first thing that came up to me, that jumped out at me was, remember the Dale Carnegie book, the How to Win Friends and Influence People. I read that 4 or 5 years ago, and I was really late to the game for that book, but I thought the book was great. But it's the first thing I thought of. But anyway, what I don't know how Psychology Today works as a platform, but do you just recommend topics that you want to write about, or they suggest them, or how does that work?
Actually, the way that blog works, I'm totally a free agent. I write when I want to. I write as often as I want to. I write about whatever I want to. They have certain guardrails. You can't get too political. You can't advocate for policy positions. If you are writing anything that sounds like hate speech or prejudicial statements, that's going to be a non-starter. But aside from that, they're pretty hands-off. Right. I write for some other outlets that are a little more specific about what they want me to write about. They say, hey, could you do a piece on this or a piece on that? Right. So the Psych Today one I like because it's pretty much whatever I want to say.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, that leads to my next question. So how did you figure out, or what made you settle on writing a blog on how to get people to like you? Were you feeling a little insecure that day, that week?
Well, and every other day. But the blogs that I write come from a variety of places. Sometimes it's just something pops up during the course of everyday life, and I say, I wonder why people do that. And I go and read a little bit about it, and then I write about it. Sometimes it's based on my own research. So I've done some studies, and I want people to know about that. This particular one, I was browsing through the journals where psychologists publish these tedious articles that we, read to see what's going on in the world of research. And I ran across the study that was done about how to get people to like you. And it kind of caught my attention. And as I was reading it, I realized I think other people would like to know about this as well. So this was a case where I'm writing about somebody else's research.
Right, right, right. No, but he did a great job of just kind of, rising it up to kind of a, layman's. You summarized it well. I went to the actual study, and this is the Duffner and Krauss study, right? We're talking about.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and you get back into, and I think what I like about psychology today as a platform is they just do a great job of just bubbling things up for the. I'm not a psychologist, right? Psychiatrist. I'm interested in how people think, and they do a great job of diluting it, or distilling it, I should say, to like the key points where you don't have to really get into the weeds. But and your blog was exactly that. It made a lot of sense to me, and I thought the same thing. I thought, well, who wouldn't want to sort of have a little bit better understanding of just how to interact with other fellow humans and be likable. But I will say, and you probably saw this in kind of my notes that I sent you, the underpin, and you could tell me where I think I might have been thinking about this wrong, but what it sort of read as when I was reading it, and I don't think that was your intent, but you can correct me. I'm like, well, maybe being liked really should that be our goal? And is that in contrary to just being our authentic self? And after I reflected on it, I said, no, I'm thinking about it wrong. That wasn't the point. But that was kind of underpinning in my head as I read it,
Sure. And I believe you used the word icky to describe,
yeah.
Or slimy. That slimy,
technical.
I think, was another word that if you're all about just trying to get other people to like you, is there something wrong with that? And I think the argument I would make is that's what we're doing anyway. It's not like this article would be giving people advice to start doing something that they aren't already trying to do. I think in most interactions, maybe you're not working really hard to get people to like you, but you're probably interested in not having them dislike you. So at the very least, you're going about that. And I think the advice that you might take from the article is, given that you're going to be doing this anyway, you might as well do it intelligently.
Do it well, yeah.
And I think a lot of people think other people aren't going to like them unless they impress them in some way. About how talented they are, about how important they are. And that's where you start getting sort of braggy and listing your accomplishments. And what they found in that particular study was this isn't really a ticket to having people like you, especially if you go too far. It actually has the opposite effect. They see you as kind of a blowhard, and they don't, and they don't want to hang out with you. Right, so, I think the message is you can get other people to like you quite well without talking about yourself or advertising your own qualities. And that's where the difference between the communal and agentic qualities came into play in their study. The communal things are all about connecting with other people, showing you have an interest in them, being a good listener. The very same things that Carnegie wrote about so long ago in his book absolutely is the thing that people walk away from the conversation feeling good about themselves, feeling good about you. Whereas even if you've successfully impressed them by bragging about your accomplishments, they walk away from that, that guy's pretty cool, but I can never be like that. And I feel bad if I'm hanging around with him too much. So, it just doesn't work the way you want it to.
Yeah. And well, maybe summarize the study for us. Cause I got a lot of questions on what you just said and there's millions of places we can go with that, but yeah, I like your sort of response to, this is not about being, this is not about just working to be that snake oil salesman and just selling yourself. It's really not what that's about. But
you also use the expression, would it be better to be your authentic self? Well, if your authentic self kind of sucks, then maybe you don't want to be your authentic self. And, a little bit of self-awareness might go a long way there. But,
right. Because your authentic self might need some work, and that's okay. And maybe society's feedback in a candid way is what you need. And so yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it. You don't have to be fake, but perhaps you should be working on your authentic self and right. Some needle there to thread, I think is.
I think it's about a balance. If your authentic self is someone who's really preoccupied with your status and your accomplishments, and this is what you tend to talk about naturally, maybe dialing that back a bit and realizing that there's another arena that you need to sort of be competing in if you want to be on the good side people. It's a way of educating your authentic self, I think.
Right. And we all know those folks, right? I mean, I'm in the Washington, D.C. area. We got plenty of those folks. I mean,
yeah, you do.
So, I mean, I'm lucky where I got a good circle around me that we kind of not, I don't want to say mock, but we identify with those people and be like, oh God, that guy will not stop talking about himself, because
Mhm.
DC's the power, it's all the cliche stuff that you read about. It's a lot of it here. I mean, there's a lot of amazing folks as well, but you can really see it. And when you're talking to somebody that all they're doing is broadcasting and waiting for you to stop talking, and they're just broadcasting all the good stuff they're doing, and it's you don't walk away feeling like, man, I really want to have another conversation with that person. You just
No,
don't. Now
absolutely
you
not.
may think, wow, I really want to get to know that person, but the reason is a little bit more on the how can I leverage that relationship to
Exactly.
to be strategic. And I really, I don't think I could say anything bad about that either. But it's not, hey, I want to really build a relationship with that person. This person's a person I'm going to call when I have a problem in my life with my family or kids. There's a difference there. So it, I don't want to just throw stones at either side, but there's a difference, and you can definitely see it for sure. Yeah.
Sure.
But so maybe summarize the study. What was the study about?
Well, it was actually pretty straightforward. They
Uh,
had people interacting with strangers, and depending upon the day and the individual, anywhere from 3 to 5 people that they didn't know before. They had a 5 minute conversation with them. And before they had the conversation, they introduced them to each other, just a moment of kind of hello, small talk.
mm,
And they were asked, okay, before you even start this conversation, tell me what you think about this person. What is your first impression like? And then they had the 5 minute conversation. And after it was over, they did that again. Now that you've had a chance to get to know the person a little more and
mm,
talk to them, now tell me what you think. And they were looking at uh, how their feelings might have changed from before to after. And then they had uh, people who were trained as raters look at the videotapes of these interactions
mm,
and rate the behaviors of the people involved in the conversation. Were they more agentic? Were they more confident and self assured and a little bit braggy? Or were they more genuinely trying to connect with the other person and asking them questions? And then they had a rating of, how agentic or communal they were and how much they were liked by the other individual. But they
mm,
also measured separately, they made the distinction between popularity and what they called unique liking.
mm,
Popularity, the way they used the term, was more about how much do you think other people like this person? How much do you think other people admire them and
mm,
respect them and envy them? Uh, Versus, how much did you just really like this person, want to spend time with them?
mm,
And how well liked is this person by people that know him well, as friends and coworkers and so forth? And what they found was that the more communal the behaviors were, both the more popular the person was perceived to be and the better liked they were perceived to be.
mm,
The agentic people often were perceived as popular, but it really had no positive effect on how likable they were. And in many cases, it went the other way. They were less likable after the conversation where they bragged about themselves.
mm. So, I mean, is that? I mean, obviously, this is one study. There's probably hundreds, right? Like any any study. There's a lot of data out there, but taking this one thing, I guess, one data point as an example, and I guess it makes total sense, right? If you're generally going to be that person that interfaces with another person, and you are more communal, and I think I understand the definition right, but if I'm talking to you on this podcast, for example, and I'm truly interested in what you're saying sincerely, and I
Mhm.
literally want you to talk more because I'm genuinely interested. And to be honest, one of the reasons I started this podcast, I'm generally sincerely interested, and I'm not selling anything. I really wanted to get in your head and hear you speak and give you the floor more and say, well, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. I imagine you'd walk away feeling closer to me and more, liking, quote unquote, me more. But what I didn't expect is that would actually up my popularity, using use that two terms, unique likeness versus
Sure.
popularity. I can see, I almost thought they'd be inversely proportionate, where one would go up, the other would go down. But it's interesting that being more communal, increase both popularity and the unique likeness. That's interesting.
Well, that's where we circle back to this idea that we often have that we're only going to be popular or likable even if we're sort of special and people admire us. And
Mm,
so, if you're a student, people are only going to like me if I get good grades, or people are only going to like me if I'm thin, or, like they think the
yeah,
liking is tied to some standard out there that you've got to meet. When really it's much simpler than that. It's all about connecting on a personal
yeah,
level. It's a social skill when you think about it. You Certainly want people to think well of you and respect you for what you do. I think the term humble bragging originated with
Yeah.
the, you want people to kind of know some good things about yourself, but you're conscious of not coming across as too much of a blowhard.
Right,
So
right. Which
yeah,
is
you're
it's almost
walking a
ultra
fine line.
deceiving. And some folks
Well,
that do that, if they do that strategically, it's like you still have the agenda. They're actually like the next level of sort of strategically trying to impress you, where they know that if they try too hard, you'll see that you're trying too hard. So they intentionally try to mask it as, well, no, I stink at this too, but they really want you to, again, I don't want to make it sound so negative, but again, being in this DC area, I'm surrounded and I observe people so often, and I go to my hometown, it's a small town in New England. I mean, the humans are just so different. I mean,
yeah.
the humans are just so different, right? Where folks just care about, are you coming over for dinner? That's all they care about. They
Yeah.
don't care, yeah, I'll leave work early. I don't know. I got to be back. They just want to go back home to dinner and have some wine and just talk for hours. It's not like that here.
Well, I do think we have certain social ecosystems around the country where there's
Yeah.
a premium placed on being a big shot and being a competitive individual and letting people know that.
Mm,
Washington, D.C. absolutely would be one of those places. I
right.
think Hollywood probably
Mm-hmm.
is the same way. I think if you're in the Wall Street world in
New
New York
York.
City,
Yep.
you're going to see the same thing. So I think certain types of people gravitate to those kinds of environments. And then you
Yep.
get so many of them there that they feed on each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it
Yeah.
can be exhausting.
Yeah. And I gravitated here. So I'm not throwing stones, right? I mean, there was
Mhm.
something in, when I was younger, I want to get down there. So, I really think we need all, but I think just being cognizant of it and just trying to be our better authentic selves is really the ultimate, not an ultimate goal, at least for me personally. And that's why I like having these conversations. Now obviously being, having that evolutionary lens on everything, which I think is just, it's you can't kind of ignore that. When did it, I don't know if you overlay that evolutionary lens to the study, evolutionarily, how would you explain some of these results? You know what I mean? Like what?
Well, think about the world that we existed in for most of our human history. It's only been the last 10,000 or so years that we've sort of lived in a world where we have larger communities and we regularly encounter strangers
Mm,
and we run into people different from ourselves. Our ancestors spent most of their lives in relatively small groups of roughly 150 people. That seems to be sort of the magic number.
mm,
And in these groups, to be socially successful, you had to walk a fine line. You needed to have people cooperate with you. You needed
mm,
to have people look out for you. But at the same time, you were competing with these same people for status in the group. Certainly, if you were a male, you got shut out of the mating competition if you were kind of low in the food chain.
mm,
It seems like polygamy was the usual social arrangement, and the most impressive guys,
mm,
the guys that were the top hunters and warriors, kind of hogged up most of the women, and the guys at the bottom of the chain were at the bottom. And so your reputation mattered. And
right,
the same
right.
was true for women. Their reputation would make them more or less desirable as mates by the most desirable men. So we were always worried about what other people thought about us.
Mm,
But at the same time, we always had pressure to be accepted by and liked by these other people, for them to think of you as an ally, as a trusted partner in a business relationship.
mm.
Um, if you got ostracized from the group, it was a death sentence. You
Yeah.
just weren't going to make it on your own. And so I think, again, our caveman brains are functioning just like they always did. But now we live in a world where we have social media and all kinds of other avenues for trying to manage our reputation
Mm,
and connect with other people. And the number of people that we connect with is, we're not really prepared for that. I
right,
mean, it used to be you had a couple of dozen people that maybe you encountered on
right.
a regular basis. You might have 1,000 Facebook friends, and you might work in a company with a couple hundred coworkers. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. You
yeah,
mentioned that 150, the Dunbar's number, right?
it is Dunbar's number.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. Yeah, yeah. And now, like you said, I think our brain is still thinking, hey, I don't recognize these people. What's going on? I don't think I knows how to deal with that. And we call them friends, right? But
Sure.
in quote friends, right?
Yep.
Um, well, what I always wonder is, what is going to happen? I mean, do you? And I don't know anything about the biology of the human genome really, or how we kind of evolve. But are we going to accelerate? Like I don't see. Usually, the force of acceleration was death. Like you died, so adaptation, and it's not going to be a discussion on evolution in general, but I think that's the position where you either if you died off, then that gene would sort of go away and you'd adapt. So in this world, I don't know how we would adapt biologically to the changing world around us because we don't really die if we don't adapt. You know what I mean? Maybe I'm missing some nuance there, but
Well, it's not just about living or dying, but yes, that's a prereq, right? If you don't live,
yeah,
nothing else happens. But but you also have to be successfully able to get those genes into the next generation. So you have to uh, be able to find mates that are going to stick with you. You're
mm-hmm.
got to be able to have children that are going to survive and thrive. And so the only way this goes away is okay, think about the world we live in now. Um, people, if people who are adept at using social media, for example, did better reproductively than people who didn't. They were more successful at attracting and keeping mates and
Mm-hmm.
friends,
Yeah.
and they did reproduce more often. That gene would be favored,
Mm-hmm.
and over time, uh, we would change in a way that's more compatible with social media. The problem is we're talking about time frames that are so long.
Well,
Social
yeah,
media,
right.
yeah, the way that social media has been around in its current form, what, 20 years
Yeah, I mean,
or so,
yeah, right.
and who knows what's going to be around 20 or 30 years from now. And so it's a moving target, and we don't have time for this competition to play out the way it did prehistorically
Right.
speaking, where the natural environment pretty much stayed the same as did the social environment. So I think we're kind of stuck
Yeah, and that's
playing by the caveman rules while all this other stuff swirls around us.
exactly what sort of I was getting at is the genome is quote unquote being evolving at a certain rate, and now and based on all for the most part, 99% of our quote unquote history that was in sync, right? We were in sync with
Yep.
that environment, and now the environment is exponentially going like this, but our biology it can't do that, right? Or
No, no.
like something has to happen, and that's where I start thinking of okay, AI, and are we going to merge with machines? I mean, at some level, that I think that's the next step. I mean, if you look at what Elon Musk is doing with AI is doing, I mean, there's we're already tethered to our phone for the most part. And the next is the implants with Neuralink. How and it's an interesting, and I don't know if you get into this world at all, but I feel like that's the next level of human evolution is we're going to have to go beyond just biology and carbon based life. Like we have to get into the silicon world because
But again, we come back to the issue. This kind of thing takes tens of thousands of years, and you can't do it in a couple of hundred years, even unless there is some abruptly traumatic change where okay, suddenly anybody who is just a biological human who has not been
mm-hmm.
merged in some way or other with AI
doesn't live
that
or can't
or don't
reproduce or
reproduce. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
right.
And if that's true for everybody, then things can happen faster. But ordinarily, that doesn't take place. It's little baby steps over generations that, in the long run, favor one type of person over another.
Right.
I
Yeah. But I
yeah,
don't think, but I do think at some point, 20 years, 50 years, if you don't have, you don't have there was a Black Mirror episode on it. What do they call it? The little implant thing. I forgot what they called it, but, you don't have the implant. And it's like, I'm not really ready for that. And you were considered like, well, you can't really think as fast. You can't Google by thinking. You don't have interactive, you can't interact with the internet by thinking of it. You're just kind of a dinosaur, now maybe that won't affect your reproductive, success rate. But I don't, if something like that doesn't happen, I guess then we'll just be from now until, I don't know, infinity will always be at this evolutionary mismatch and can never catch up. And, I don't know where it goes. It's like what got us here
either.
is not going to get us there sort of, I know that's that book that's pretty interesting, but it's just an interesting, just an interesting concept.
Yeah, if we had the answer to that, we could make some money in the long
Yeah.
run, right? If you knew what to invest in and what direction it was going to go.
Yeah, it's an odd, it's an amazing time to be alive. It really is, see what's going on, but it's a little scary, especially with kids. I have 2 children. It's like seeing them and seeing how they can navigate. They're trying to navigate with their little caveman minds, right? With um, the social media and the always connectedness and people liking them or not liking them that they barely even know. And it's just like, well, does that shouldn't matter, but you can't tell them it shouldn't matter. It's really hard to even parent in this current environment. I
Absolutely.
mean, you and
Yeah,
I are
no,
confused about it. How the heck are they going to know how to navigate it? Um, but man, it's crazy.
but yeah, that does create a whole lot of stress for kids. That it's so much easier to feel like a loser
Right.
in the
Yeah.
21st century than
Yeah.
it used to be, because the number of competitors you now perceive that you have has multiplied tremendously. Again, thinking about our caveman ancestors, if you were of a certain age and gender in your group, all right, there might be 4 or 5 other people around
Yeah.
your age that you kind of had to keep your eye on. Uh, but now you click onto whatever social media platform you're on, and everybody is attractive, and everybody has an exciting life, and
Yeah.
everybody's doing wonderful things.
Right.
And even though you may be trying to keep up with that publicly, inside you're just feeling defeated.
Right.
There's
And it's
no
a false
way.
comparison. It's always a
Yeah,
false comparison. You're
yeah,
comparing your reality to their highlight reel. That's all you're
exactly right.
doing, and
Yep,
it's not
yep,
healthy and it's fake. But you can't tell a 13-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old girl. It's not going to get in, right? They're insecure. They're developing their how they're valued and their sense of value. And I think as my wife and I have this conversation all the time to instill self-worth and value irrespective of those other folks. But they're still going to feel that pressure, and it's hard, right? I mean,
and
we
it
as adults we fall into it. We look at we're scrolling. You're not seeing regular life on there because that's
no,
boring. That's so
yep.
boring. Who wants to see that? You're seeing the highlight reels with, oh, by the way, with filters, so everyone seems to just look better. That's not. And you look at yourself in the mirror with all your reality and your flaws and the human stuff, and then you look at this and you just feel like shit, right? I mean, I love getting older because I don't really care about that anymore. But I didn't have to go through it as a kid because it didn't exist. But I just can't imagine, a young person now having to just navigate that.
Well, it amplifies all the nasty stuff that happens with kids too. It
Yeah.
Again, if you use the example of like a junior high school girl, all right, the Gossip Network was always kind of mean and nasty, but it
Mm-hmm.
used to be a more slow motion kind of thing. Somebody's told somebody something about you, and
Yeah.
now you press a button, and some video of you or some story about you gets transmitted to thousands of people
Yeah.
potentially, and everybody knows about it.
Mm.
And we're not prepared for the consequences of our nasty behaviors to have that kind of impact.
Yeah.
The blowback can be really strong. So yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. And the other thing, it's like going back to sort of, ancestral realities was if you did or said something, if you hurt somebody that way, quote unquote, whether it's just with words or physically in person, which is the only way it could happen, there was
Hmm.
repercussions, physical, right?
Yeah.
Or you just didn't have the courage to do it because you didn't want to see that person's face, or especially in the guy in the male realm, you say something wrong to that tribesman, you might get just attacked or killed, right?
Or even if they just socially ostracized
Ostracized
you.
you, right?
Okay, yeah,
Which is basically death, like you said
we're
earlier.
not going to have anything to do with you. And so now some of the most influential people in the tribe
Hmm.
and their relatives, you're dead to them.
Yeah.
They're not physically attacking you, but they're not cooperating with you. They're not going to help you in time of need. Uh, their allies are not going to have anything to do with you. So there's lots of ways we can sanction people for bad behavior.
Hmm.
That's why we have emotions like shame and guilt.
Yeah.
They exist because what that forces us to do is acknowledge, okay, I've been a bad person. I throw myself on your mercy. I'm not going to ever do this again, to
Hmm.
try to win your way back into their good graces.
Right. Yeah. Now with the internet, you can just throw, you can lob, you can just dunk on somebody from a million miles away, don't even know them, and you're just, and you don't even really realize the implication. You just move on with your day, and it's like, so it's like almost like you don't, what you just said about feeling that anxiety or feeling that like remorse or feeling, oh, I'm sorry. You don't even have the sort of, you don't even have the data to make you feel that way, because maybe you say something evil to some young girl, makes you're fat, some whatever can hurt a person's feelings, right? It's an infinite amount of things, and you don't really get to see the impact. You just log off, go to the next thing, and they're running with that emotion. You don't even have the ability to say, oh shit, what I just did was terrible, look at that. You don't kind of see it. It's almost like a drone bomb from a mile away.
The long distance thing makes it easy to dehumanize. I've been thinking about this just in the last few days with the Hamas Israeli situation. It's terrible. And it's terrible in a different way than we're accustomed to. Because, all right, we're used to people launching rockets. They're blowing up parts of cities. They're killing people. But the person who's doing the act doesn't really know where that's going to land or who's going to die. And it's all sort of antiseptic, although the end result is just as horrible.
It's the drone. But now we're talking about a case with drones and stuff.
We're talking about a case where people are going right into people's houses and killing them, with their bare hands and mutilating their bodies and children. I mean,
burning
it's
babies.
A much more, this
terrible.
Is so much more visceral and real for our caveman minds, because this is what we can imagine. And this is horrible to us. Whereas the rocket going off into some unknown place, it doesn't affect us the same way. And I think the social media thing is tapping into that same tendency, that these are not people that are standing in front of me where I can see the impact of my behavior.
So, well, you brought it up, so I'm going to go there. So I really do value your opinion here. Without getting political, maybe we can. I don't really care. But so if it makes a lot of sense evolutionarily. You traditionally wouldn't do basically what Hamas is doing. You wouldn't do that. It doesn't make much sense, I guess, evolutionarily. Now, I guess the religion thing and that really makes things complicated, and I don't even want to get in their minds, but they're proclaiming certain things. But I guess, how do you try to understand it, right? When the rest of us, like you say, we look back, we see what's going on in the world, and I mean, it's easy to just go on with our day. I'm here in Washington, D.C., and the greatest country in the world, and there's no bombs overhead. It's beautiful out, and my Amazon guy is dropping off a package literally right now, right? I know I'm blessed and lucky beyond. I know it, and I nothing but gratitude, and I try to stay in that mindset. But then you try to understand what's happening to the same species called humans.
Sure.
And I mean, is it so anyway, what is your perspective? How do you try to understand and go to bed at night thinking what the hell's going on?
A big part of our psychology that comes from the old days is the big distinction we make between in-groups and out-groups.
They're the other. They're not.
The other. We perceive our group, people who are likely to share genes with me, as more important. Our moral values are better. We're just better people. Out-group members are less so. And if they're out-group members that are direct competitors of ours, there is a tendency to very quickly dehumanize them, stereotype them, which kind of enables you to do all kinds of bad things to them. Because if God is on your side and you hold the moral high ground, anybody who's opposing you is at best, just sort of misguided, but more likely out and out evil, and they need to be dealt with harshly. And so most of the most terrible things that have happened in the history of humanity have been done by people who firmly knew they were doing the right thing.
In their minds, this was the right thing. I guess that's the only way you can imagine they could get to that point in taking the actions they're doing, right? You can't be that, I don't really want to do this, but I guess I will, because, you know what I mean? Because it's so horrific. You don't think they could be in that mindset to actually, go through with some of these actions. They have to have an amazing justification, ecosystem in their mind.
I'm sure these very same people who committed these unspeakable atrocities in their day-to-day private lives have friends that they do favors for. They're nice to their children. They're, good husbands, and they've just created different rules for the different groups in the world.
Isn't that fascinating from again, staying apolitical and not in the religious realm? I'm actually a practicing Christian, and I speak a lot about evolution because it fascinates me. So I have a whole lot of stuff rolling around in my head all the time, but I'm never going to stop talking and asking questions. So, you probably wouldn't detect that if you just hearing us talk here. But but I think it's fascinating hearing, or just as that what you just articulated, that these same folks committing the most unthinkable, burning babies alive. I mean, and I say it because people want to just brush over and just say, oh, they're committing murder. No, we'll say some of the details. It's horrific what they're doing. So doing that and then going kissing their maybe their children at night, and well, they certainly don't treat women well, so that's bullshit. But anyway, I'm sure that, to your point, they treat a lot of folks in their circles very well, and they have very caring. And so, how the hell does the human mind get to that point where you can just isn't that called a psychopath? Or there's some or they decouple the. I don't know what you're the expert. How the heck does that brain work?
The psychopath thing. When you first brought this up, you were talking about, well, we would never engage in that kind of vicious, awful behavior. You were clearly thinking about within our in-group, right? The psychopath is the person who is willing to exploit and do whatever they need to do to anyone, including their closest relatives and friends. They're people without a conscience, essentially. What we're talking about now, though, with the in-group, out-group thing, that unfortunately makes me very pessimistic about human nature in the long run, because it worked okay. I should qualify that, I guess, but in the world where we were living in these little bands of people that were separated from each other, there weren't that many people in the world. And having this strong bond with your in-group and being very suspicious and distrustful of out-groups was actually kind of an adaptive thing. If you were kind of naive and just wandered into the next tribe saying, hey, how are you guys doing?
Right, you get a spear to the neck.
It may not have gone so well. But in the world we live in now, where we're all on top of each other and there's so many people mixed together, that kind of psychology it's the thing that's going to do us in.
Doesn't work,
and it's not surprising. It's been with us forever. I mean, how far back in history do you want to go and see one group killing another group off and firmly believing they're doing the right thing while they're doing that?
And what you're saying is it's so true, because entire governments use that as a tactic, and dictators use the tactic to, the first thing we got to do is stamp that other group as the other. They're the enemy. Now, how do they propagandize to get that other group to be thought of as the enemy? And that's like the first step, right? That is the first step to have the atrocities be committed. And so it obviously is the way the human brain works, because the powers to be have exploited that for war for eons, right? I mean,
and nothing bonds us together within our group like a common enemy. Look at America after 9/11, Israel after this attack by Hamas. At any point in history, the sudden fervor, the flag waving, the patriotism to go get that enemy. It's just who we are.
Yeah, people still talk about New York City after 9/11. Hugging in the subway, and just crazy and amazing silver lining to that, that horrific event. But you're right. Yeah. It's just, it's a crazy fallen world. I don't know. It's tough to, so you're not that optimistic of us humans. Like, you know too much about how we work, I guess.
We've been around a long time, and it hasn't gotten a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the same problem over and over.
Yeah, I always say, if we can accelerate, and this is where I am optimistic, because I think when you the harder it is to other the other folks, right? I said other too many times there, but the harder it is to other another group, I think the better we'll all be, because it's going to be harder for us to feel so away from them and feel so, and give us, it'd be harder to dehumanize other folks, right? And I think one of the reasons I think it's easier to dehumanize create the other is language, right? We speak different languages, and you see it when I love watching those videos where, like just a regular white guy from the States, like look like me, goes over to China or something and just speaks perfect Mandarin, and the welcoming they get. And you're immediately welcomed, and not like they weren't welcome before, but they were just kind of like, oh, I don't know what that guy's doing, right? It just looks different. And as soon as you speak their language, it's like the first step in like, hey, come over to my house and see my family. Let's have dinner, right? In a foreign country. It's like, so maybe between, I think, the language thing and the ability to start traveling and, all around the world, and eventually people will stop caring are you Italian? Are you African American? And we'll just be like, we're all freaking mixed. We've all been having sex together for a million years, and we know we're global. I don't know, we're human. Like, you know what I mean? And it sounds cliche to say, but ultimately, maybe we all speak the same or all understand each other's language because. With Google, I can talk into something. It's going to, it'll maybe the implant will do it, and we can immediately communicate. If that gets to a certain point, and then anyone can be anywhere in the world in an hour or two with advanced who knows, maybe those otherings get harder. I mean, that's an optimistic way to look at it, but
no, I would agree. And that as much as we can eradicate those borders that separate me from you in some way or other, that's going to be a good thing. But it does, I think, run counter to our natural inclination to be able to think in terms of a smaller group that I'm comfortable knowing, coming back to Dunbar's number. It's, and even when you were mentioning language, I immediately thought of how quickly dialects and accents develop, even in a small country.
Oh, that's a good point.
Like Ireland, for example.
Italy, where I'm from, it's the same exact thing. It's a million dialects.
You can tell where somebody's from as soon as they open their mouth, and it's a way of advertising. Here's where I'm from. And if I have an accent like yours, we're part of the same group, and maybe we share some genes, and that makes us more likely to treat them in a preferential way compared to somebody who's clearly an outsider.
Oh, Frank, that's fascinating.
We don't necessarily hate the outsider, but at every stage, we're prepared to identify, okay, here we are. This is my group. This is my group. And I agree with you that this is the thing that's at the source of so much of our trouble. But boy, we've got our work set out for us to try to overcome that.
Oh, that dialect thing is fascinating. I don't want to let that go for a second, just because I think what I just heard you say is, even if we did speak the same language, say in Ireland, for your example, it's almost like our Dunbar numbered, brain is still looking for a way to create a small group that we can belong to. So, hey, we may all speak the same language, but let's create a small dialect in this local region so we can better identify our smaller tribe, if you will. It's almost like that's interesting. That is interesting.
Well, and you see it at every level. I mean, you've got the cliques in junior high school and high school.
Yeah.
You've got the fraternities and sororities and universities. Yeah. We have this impulse to just, let's get ourselves together in a smaller group of.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but the bad thing is when we start going down that road of my group is great and your group isn't. To my group is right and moral and your group is not. And then
that's the balance that we have to reach where, but it's like one leads to it's almost like a natural next step where, okay, if I'm going to form a smaller group to be comfortable for whatever reason, you did that for a reason. So, right, the other folks are doing things or believing things or look a certain way or sound a certain way, and that's why they're not in your group. So it almost leads to reason that you would think less of that other stuff.
And one of the problems evolutionary psychologists have when they talk about stuff like this is people resist the idea that there is such a thing as human nature. In other words, that we come into the world sort of prepared to be one way or another. Because I think people think what they're saying is, oh, well, if something evolved or it's part of human nature, then it's okay. That we should let people kill each other and dehumanize each other because it's natural.
Right.
Well, nobody is saying that. Think of the analogy to a disease. If we find out that a disease has a genetic basis, we don't say, oh, well, it's genetic. Let's let people die of it.
It's adapting. Let us do it.
Yeah. We feel like we've learned something important about it that's going to help us deal with it. And I think that's the way we need to start thinking about this. To ignore the real root of all of this hostility and conflict that exists in the world is not going to make us better prepared to deal with it. We have to understand where it's coming from. But I will acknowledge I'm sort of a minority voice in this regard, because most people in the social sciences certainly don't think of it that way. It's all about socialization. People hate each other because they've learned to hate each other.
Interesting.
But they've learned to hate each other because we're programmed to very easily learn to hate other
Right.
people
Doesn't mean
that
it
are
should
different from
just be
ourselves.
applauded
Yeah.
and augmented. It should,
Yeah,
right. It doesn't mean
exactly.
it's what's best for us. Right. 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 Yeah. I mean, if you just take away the spiritual side, take away all that, just say, well, we're just an adapting organism. Doesn't mean it's adapting for survival. Period. Right. I mean, is there, if you just look at it that so doesn't mean that it's that evolution, that those patterns of survival are going to be beneficial in our new world. Right. I think that's kind of your perspective. It's like, well, we could adjust that, tweak that. We could understand it and maybe not just celebrate it at every level. Um, but it's funny. I said on a previous guest I had on, I said, it's almost like they need to have folks like you in the White House. Like, okay, we need like 4 or 5 evolutionary psychologists just in the White House. I always use that term interchangeably. I don't mean to. Evolutionary psychologists, maybe is probably a better way to say it. To like when they're trying to understand, and maybe they do. I don't know, I'm speaking kind of ignorantly, like I know. When we're trying to understand how other parties work, other countries work, other people, like they should kind of go to like the evolutionary folks. They're like, all right, really only understand the psychology behind why they're thinking this way, right? And because I feel like in a society we do almost do what you were kind of saying. We don't give credit to, like, there's so much male violence and there's so much, you hear about this stuff and no one ever brings up, not that it's an excuse, right? And we don't want to just say, oh, they, males are evolved to be violent because they're tribes. That's not what I'm saying, but at least to understand, and maybe in the rehab centers and the prisons, I don't know, they could start incorporating that where like, hey, because there's different forces at play in our natural DNA, which not everyone has the same sort of, I guess, desire or impulses to do certain things, but many of them are, baked into us, right? And I think the better we understand that, again, not as an excuse for the action, but just we can, I think maybe understand it better and treat it better and learn from it better, I guess.
Part of the problem with when you mentioned being in the White House is when it comes to human nature and understanding why people are the way they are, everybody thinks they're an expert.
Yeah, that's true.
Like I don't need to consult with someone to know what to do to deal with my enemy
Yeah.
because I already know what I need to know. And there's very little incentive
Right.
to say, well, I don't really know what's going on here. Let me go see if I can find an expert that does.
Right.
Because people are going to look at you and say, well, didn't we elect you
You're the leader of the free world.
to
You
know
should
know about this? Yeah,
Right,
yeah, that's right. And people who gravitate to these positions of power, whether we're talking about in the corporate world or government world, they're there because they do think pretty well of themselves
They're
and they are
agentic,
confident.
right? Definitely more on the
Yes,
agentic side.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's a tough. I mean, nobody wants some intellectual so-called expert coming in and telling them stuff that they know isn't true.
Right. Ego won't allow it. But to your point, nor the general public wouldn't want that, right? I mean, but let's, I don't know. I would think a good leader would, you have to put on that sort of front of like, I'm a strong leader. I got it all under control. But maybe before you come to those decisions, you backroom conversations with, with you and others,
sure.
say, okay, I want to really understand this so I can, but you don't want to publicly say, I don't know, I'm just vulnerable. I'm a vulnerable human. I got to figure this out. That's not okay for a leader to be, but.
Well, it is shocking sometimes how little our politicians, just to pick on somebody in particular, seem to know about important stuff. I still remember George W. Bush's line, who knew there were different kind of Muslims? Here we are messing in Middle Eastern affairs where people are at each other's throats, not even being aware of what the source of the problem is. And certainly he had access to experts who could have told him about this, but yeah.
And on one hand, you can't expect them to know everything. They're one human. It's like the hardest job ever. It's just ridiculous that we put one person in. Like, oh, we'll pick one person. That'll go well. It seems weird.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine having that job.
Well, and picking one person who really, really wants that job.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the person who looks at the job description, right? Okay, you're in charge of the greatest military in the world, the largest economy, hundreds of millions of people's lives are hanging in the balance of every one of your decisions. Oh, that sounds like me.
Sounds like me. Yeah. No, you're right. That I had a conversation with a buddy a while ago, and a real smart dude, a buddy of mine that I absolutely love to death. And we got to that point late night having a few drinks, and it came down to that. Can you imagine the type of person that would want that job? And those are only the people that get that job. And then just kind of live in that world for a second and go, man, whew. God help us. It's just because it does take
Yep.
because I think as you rise up, it starts maybe at a intrinsic and organic. I want to make change. I really want to help. But as you go up in the machine, right, you're playing the game and you're gears in that machine because you have to be to get there. So I think, and again, pessimistic view maybe, but I think it's realistic. By the time you get to that position, you've played the game so darn well. I think it's hard. I think it's easy to lose track of what started your journey in the first place. And maybe I believe that was honest and a really good, a real sincere desire maybe to do good. But I think by the time you get up there, you can't just focus on doing good and get there. You can't, because you have to play
Well,
the game and you got to.
you owe people money now because you wouldn't be
Yes.
there if they didn't contribute.
Right.
And you're surrounded by sycophants
Yep. Yep.
who
Yep.
tell you what you want to hear and tell you how great you are. And if this is all you hear all day long every day, you start, I guess I am pretty great. I guess
damn awesome.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
To live in such a world. Huh?
I know. We are, man. That's what I joke about friends too, like all these alien sightings and whatnot. Going around like, if they're out there looking down, going, they must be like, damn, these humans are freaking insane. Think of like if they really are like us in a million years evolved or something. Looking back on, wow, do you remember that? Look at that. You remember when?
The good old days. Yeah.
You remember when they thought splitting the atom was amazing and they just nuked each other and like it is crazy to just think what's going on now. But I don't know. It's exhausting being this like thinking and having these conversations because it's so fun. I enjoy it so much. But when you take a step back, it's like, man, you just gotta go back to normal life for a while and pretend everything's just regular normal. I mean, do you have? I always ask my friends in the psychology world like you and others, but like, do you have a hard time? Just do you have to like consciously shut this thinking part of your mind off? You understand human nature so well, you understand how we got here and what people's actions are and all the stuff underlying everything we do. It's tough to sort of just do your day-to-day regular life. I mean, is it, I guess, or do you have it just the way?
People have asked me that question before, and I think every psychologist gets asked that question. And the answer is no. You don't walk around constantly with your professional hat on, analyzing everything that everybody says and does.
Exhausting.
I have a caveman brain just like everybody else, and I'm walking
But
around on automatic
That's
pilot.
the problem.
I know it. I know it. That's right. And I'm proud of it. Yeah. And but I do find myself noticing things that I know, like cognitive biases that people have, the way we think, why we selectively vilify some people and not others. And so I am aware of that going on around me all the time. But I don't know that that's any different than somebody in any other profession who has some expertise related to people.
Yeah.
And, so no, it doesn't. I'm not a tortured soul.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I should have asked it
I
that
don't
way.
walk around thinking about stuff like that. No.
Yeah, it's yeah. I guess you have to, right? Again, maybe a little adaptation. If that's all you did all day, psychologists probably would have died off a while ago. People that think like that, and maybe there'd be no
psychology.
Right, there'd be no psychology because people wouldn't have bred that think like that,
or reproduce.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. How do you? I guess we got a few more minutes here. What do you got going on in your professional life? You're a professor at Knox College.
Knox College, in Galesburg, Illinois. Well, I'm getting very close to retirement.
Congrats.
It's certainly going to happen within the next year or two, and I've got some. I'm still doing some writing, like for Psychology Today, and I've got some journal articles in the works based on some studies that I've done in the last couple of years with some of my students. But for the most part, I probably do as much media stuff as I do anything else. This has become sort of a new outlet.
It's kind of fun, right? I mean, it's just, especially when you're talking about work you've already done. It's like, there's no prep. You already did the prep. You just, share the wealth.
Best part of the day today. I've got to teach some classes later and meet with students. But,
cool.
But I'm, I mean, this week alone, I think I have 3 media interviews that I'm doing. So I keep busy.
Yeah.
But it is, you get to a certain age and you see sort of the end of the career and you don't have the energy and adrenaline you once had. And so you're ready to sort of
get on those peptides.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So what do you want to do, you think? I mean, what does retirement mean for you? I guess I've been asking a lot of folks this question. I mean, I'm not there yet, but I foresee I don't know, for me personally, retirement's not a thing where I stop It's just a thing where the ratio of what I want to do versus what I have to do changes. That's all for me. I'm just not ever going to slow down. I just love doing and building, and I just love doing stuff. So for me, there's no like stop, be on a beach. That's not even a thing for me. But how about for you? What does retirement look like for you?
Yeah, I don't. I guess being a professor, you're fortunate, and an academic in general, you don't have that sort of abruptness that most people have when they retire. You're in the office 9 to 5 one day, worrying about all kinds of things, and the next day, boom, you hand in your keys and you're done,
Yeah.
and there's nothing else. I'm involved in. I do a little bit of consulting work. I'm doing media stuff. I
Yeah.
do some writing on my own. I will have the luxury, if I want to teach an occasional course, part time. So I don't have that cliff that you suddenly fall
Right.
off of as a retiree. I can kind of ease into it. And related to that, I also don't have any big dreams or plans like some people do. They're going to retire and they're going to take up this new hobby, or they're going to retire and travel. Well, I already travel a fair bit, and a lot of the time somebody else is paying for it because I'm not retired.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not dreading retirement, but I'm also not. I have not spent my life sitting around dreaming about it either.
Yeah, that's probably a healthy balance. Yeah. Yeah. If you have this big, like, I have retirement, then I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. That seems to be a thing where you're putting off something that you might die. I mean, the statistics about people
Sure.
dying right at retirement is kind of scary sometimes. Like maybe that taper and that reassessment more as a more continuum is a healthier way to kind of look at it. And especially what you said, traveling, like not waiting to travel, especially on other people's dime. That's fantastic. It's a great way to do it.
Yep.
But, well, Frank, thank you so much for the time. This was fun. I knew it would get exciting because I've been following you for a while since we did our last. I'm like, we'll have a good conversation. We started on something, we ended on a whole bunch of other stuff. It's exactly what I love. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
You got it.